Whether you are a brand new or longtime international educator, it is probably a safe bet that you've heard about International Schools Services, better known by its acronym ISS. In today's episode, we speak with Nadine Richards and Dr. Dana Specker Watts, who had just completed work at the Atlanta ISS Recruitment Fair. The bios for each are extensive and inspiring, so please check the show notes for the full read. Dana is the Director of Learning, Research, and Outreach. Nadine is the Director of Leadership Services. In this episode, we discuss several programs that International Schools Services offers its clients, including leadership recruitment and coaching support following placement. We took a deep dive to learn about the ISS Passport Professional Learning Program that offers a differentiated and personalized approach to professional learning, giving learners control over the place, content, and time of their learning. Our closing takeaway was how humanity-focused and passionate Nadine and Dana are about their work at ISS. Get ready for a rich conversation with these two dynamic leaders. This episode was recorded on December 13th, 2022. We now give you Dana and Nadine.
Good morning, Dana and Nadine. Thank you so much for being on the show. Welcome. And can you please, let's start with Dana. Can you tell us where in the world are you?
Sure. I'm located in our home office in Princeton, New Jersey.
Awesome. And Nadine?
I am located in Alpharetta, Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia region, USA.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for taking the time to be here with us today.
And we would like to start the show off by sharing a little bit of a story of whether it's something international or something connected to the work you're doing. So Nadine, do you have a going global story to share with us?
Sure. So I'm initially from Jamaica, West Indies. So I think my journey from birth started globally outside of the US. And I lived in New York for a very, very long time, most of my life, and went overseas to work in Dubai. And that was in 2014, 2015. And I went by myself with no one. And it has been the most awesome experience I've ever had. I met people from all over the world, learned new perspectives, and really gained some competencies in my leadership that I am most grateful for. So I'm back stateside now and had an opportunity to go to conferences in Panama, in Abu Dhabi, in Texas. And I've been to the Jersey office, and it's been great because I'm seeing people who I have not seen in 3-4 years, or that I've known, but only via Zoom in the last 2 years as the world was closed for COVID. So it's been great to reconnect. One of the things I am hearing is, oh, we thought you were taller, because I appear to be like 6 feet tall, but I'm probably 4'11" and 3/4. So Dana's at me.
That's awesome. Well, I'm connecting with that because I am currently also living in Jamaica in Kingston.
Nice.
So that's fun.
Very nice.
All right, Dana, how about you?
Sure. So I feel like I was an expat in the States as a child. I've moved 28 times in 53 years. So that's a lot. But the past 15 plus years were spent overseas. And so I raised my 3 children overseas in our international schools and worked at a variety of different international schools and felt very fortunate to work at all of them. And then when my kids started going to college, they said, Mom, you can't be halfway across the world. We don't know how to live in America. And I was like, what? How do you not know how to live there? That's where we're from. They're like, we're not.
Yeah.
And so I accepted the position with ISS, and then COVID happened, and COVID happened right away. And so I was originally hired to do research and outreach for ISS, and my background is in doing research within the international schools. And I quickly saw that a lot of the schools locally were not prepared to go online. And I could see that, and I knew from my prior experience that our schools overseas may not have been prepared for COVID, but we're definitely prepared for being online. For example, my old school in Bangkok, we were there through 2 coups. So we already had a backup plan of a backup plan of a backup plan. And so I reached out at the start of the pandemic, it literally right in February, I believe, and started asking educators that I knew if they would just come online and do a panel of how they were doing online learning so that other teachers could learn from them because they were a few weeks ahead of the game. And so the first podcast that we did and panel that we did was with early years educators, because we thought, how are we going to do early years online?
Right.
And then from there, so we had approximately about 300 plus educators sign in for the very first panel. By the next panel, we were doing how do we do art, music, and PE. And we were up to 1,000 educators signing in just to try to figure out how do we transition, how do we do our content area justice and try to do it online when so many people haven't done that. So my job has transitioned quite a bit, and it's been fabulous to try to help connect educators around the world with each other so we can learn from one another and not reinvent the wheel, but add into the wheel, add another spoke into the wheel, I guess.
Oh, that's a great metaphor. I appreciate your work. Thank you for having those ideas and bringing people together and being proactive on that, because we were all certainly in the thick of it. And it's a great thing to know that there's a resource out there that people can pull from. So nice work. Our guiding question is, what's happening in the world of school services and recruitment? And let's start with Nadine.
So there's a lot happening right now with school services, recruitment, and beyond. ISS is a full service firm. So just to help you and the audience know, so we do school management, we do operation services, we work with boards, we work with teachers, we work with professional development, and we do recruitment. We work with supplies. I can go on and on. And that just kind of gives us a big picture lens about the needs of school that I think impacts us as recruiters. So I'm the director of leadership searches. I work as part of the global recruitment team. And, a lot of that knowledge being in the school and then collaborating and learning from ISS different services that we offer schools really has helped shape our thinking on how to move forward with recruitment given the pandemic that we've experienced in these past 2 to 3 years. And it's really allowing us to say, how can we move recruitment forward in a time of crisis? Because we're still there. And how do we support wellness? How do we support practices that are equitable and that increase opportunity and access for very talented people who are often underrepresented in leadership? And so that's kind of the scope of what's new in recruitment, and just looking at where are our partners and opportunities for growth. So really connecting with a lot of different places and tapping into our own diversity as a team. We bring different strengths, and that allows different perspectives and healthy debates that allows us to grow as an organization, as opposed to if we had the same type of people doing the same type of things. I always like to make the analogy of like a basketball team or an orchestra or band. If you only have all trumpets, it may sound good, but what's that interjection of those other instruments? If you only have a center on the team, you're missing out of the skills that a point guard or a forward and others might bring. And so that's kind of how we think in our recruitment aspect. What are the pieces the different strengths we can bring and how do we bring those together to offer the best to our clients. And our clients include not just schools, but candidates as well. And so we serve that double purpose. So we guide candidates through leadership searches, through coaching, going over interviews with them. And then with our clients that are school-based, board-based, we often guide them through what does communication sound like, what's the words to use to make sure that your community is included in the process, that you're being transparent in the process. We walk them through our process, which is 3-4 phases, where we include a SWOT analysis, where we meet with the different constituents in the community. And this really informs, what are the strengths of the community? What are the areas for growth, weaknesses? What are the potential external threats and opportunities? And then what are those qualities people want? And it's really good to have that from the perspective of the students, the board, the administrative team, the teachers, the support staff, and parents. And this allows us to help form positions announcements, interview questions, et cetera, et cetera. And that allows us to ask culturally competent questions. That allows us to ask scenario and situational questions that really guide how people are thinking and how they would be successful in a given role, and really to dive into how they would relate with the community that we are looking to place someone to serve. So those are just, and there's much more to it. We go through the interviewing process. There are 2-3 interviews. We put people through a long list. We give a written assignment. And then we usually narrow it down to schools where we say 5 to 7 people that we'd like them to have a conversation. And this can be from 100+ applicants before, very rigorous. And then we guide the school through their part of the process. What rubrics might you be using? Who's making up your committee? Is it a cross sampling of the committee and diverse voices sitting on that committee in the interview process when they're interviewing candidates? Have you discussed blind spots and biases, and how are you curtailing those? Because we all have them, right? And then what feedback, if this is a head of school search, for example, making sure the board is forthcoming with the community that they are the decision makers, but how they are receiving input from the community. Likewise, with a principal or a head of school hiring, that they articulate that they are the decision makers, but how they plan to obtain input, surveys. And we assist with all of that in the search process. And then beyond the search, once someone is hired for a year, we can offer leadership coaching. It's part of our contract. We look to help with the transition planning. So we encourage boards to have a transition committee that works on that onboarding. And that is a huge equity piece for candidates coming in that are often underrepresented in a field of leadership that's often white male dominated. Onboarding a candidate that's a woman may look very different. How are we engaging her husband and her family? What supports are we given? Have we made the community ready for that shift and change? Likewise, with a candidate of color or that has intersecting identities that are often underrepresented, how are we getting the community ready? How are we supporting that person? And what does that onboarding process look like throughout that first and second year? So ISS partners to help with that transition. And then I don't want to go on, but again, the other services that we have, the Optimize, the PD, and I'm sure Dana can talk a lot to that. We're not just offering, often with PD, you have a certain subgroup that's getting all of the PD because that's what budget can afford, right? And ISS has created passports and opportunities where the entire community can get professional development and learning and growth, whether you're talking from your personal assistant, executive assistant, to your accountant, to your HR director, to your teacher, to your counselor. And I'll let Dana jump on and go about that. But I think that is such an added advantage that ISS really brings to the table. It's a full service. It's a full service, human based organization that looks to really make a difference in children's lives. And we're using recruitment to do that. We're using PD to do that. We're using school management to do that. We're supplying resources and supplies to support that. So I'm really proud to have joined this organization.
Well, what a wonderfully detailed answer. And it's fantastic that you, from my perspective, I've known about ISS for over 30 years, but you've really humanized the entity for me. And I also love that you bring that proactive approach to a diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice perspective. And so thank you for that wonderful response. Dana, how about from your side?
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback on something that Nadine said. And, one of the things that we're really trying to do with professional development is really reach everyone within our school. And as she mentioned, the business office and then our TAs and instructional assistants, too often they have not had access to professional development funds. But we know at the end of the day, what makes professional development sustainable when we educate the people who are going to be there in 5 years and 10 years. And our expat community tends to transition from school to school. And then the PD at times can leave the building. And then you start off with a fresh new batch of teachers who haven't had access. And so you just keep investing money again and again and again in professional development, but we're not educating the people who are going to be there long term. And so it's wonderful to be able to offer that through our ISS passport. I think whether we're talking about professional development or recruitment, I think we're in a huge period of transition because during COVID, we all had to turn everything online. But what might that look like long term? I don't know if we have a clear answer to that yet because, at ISS, we had already started to do iFairs prior to COVID and doing online fairs. Now we're doing online fairs and we're doing face-to-face ones. I literally just came home last night from our fair in Atlanta. And I also see a similar transition with professional development. We were only doing it online and we were doing live webinars. Well, now I'm seeing a push for teachers and for people who are doing professional development. Some want to do it live and do a live webinar and have breakout rooms. And then others are saying, just send me the recording because I need to watch it in a time zone that fits me. And I also want it in just-in-time learning. I don't need to learn this week, but I think I might need it 3 weeks from now. And I want to have that in my back pocket to pull out when I'm ready and able. And so I think we're still trying to figure out where's that balance of what do we do face-to-face? What do we do, synchronously and asynchronously? And we're just trying to figure that out as a sector. One other point that I was going to bring up about recruiting was, I think that we have an opportune time, all international schools, to really tap into, I think the field of education has been under attack, specifically under the past 2 to 3 years because of COVID. Educators are feeling beat up, right? The world of education is feeling on the defense instead of on the offense. And what we could do, perhaps, is really look at, we've been the best kept secret for a really long time. People don't know how amazing it is to teach overseas. And this morning I was doing crew and someone's like, what do you do for a living? Why are you always on the road? What's an international school? And this person was a teacher and they left the field of education because they hated all the bumps.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's so much that we put teachers through. And so my new tagline that I think we should all be using is don't change your career, change your location. Come overseas.
Thank you. Yes.
Work with us. I loved the world of education overseas. I was ready to jump ship when I was doing it here stateside. And it's nothing against the school stateside, and I think they have the best intentions, but our teachers are feeling hurt and abused and being pulled in so many different directions. And there's so many amazing jobs and opportunities where you will be professionally valued for all of your expertise overseas. And I'd just like to get more educators to know that these opportunities exist.
Oh, we're so glad you said that because that's at the core of our mission, why we're doing this podcast. And I'll just give a quick shout out here to a woman named Jackie Scully, who has been doing a podcast called The Teacher Story. And she gets people on there to talk about how they got into education, how the pandemic has affected them, how they're feeling about teaching, and kind of their vision for the future of education. And she really speaks to a lot of what you were just alluding to. And she has also said to us that she sees teaching internationally as a possible outlet for people who are ready to throw in the towel because, you do get out from under some of these yokes of rules that you have in the US. And also you get this whole awesome other piece to it. So, a lot of people are starting to say the kind of thing that you're saying. So I really appreciate that comment. Thank you.
So I'm sitting here and you two just knocked it out of the park. When we approach our message here, we want to cover micro things and we want to cover macro things as well. And you two have just painted the big picture. And for a lot of our folks in international education, they hear ISS and maybe they know it does something about recruiting. And you all just really helped share how many different ways you are reaching into the international community to support educators, but like you're saying, Nadine, ultimately the children. So I want to do a quick shout out to Jeff Udick. He and I used to do a podcast called Shifting Our Schools, and Jeff's restarted it, and we just did an episode with him on professional learning. And one of our sayings used to be how to stop the twatty. And by twatty, we meant, and you've both been in international schools, you come in as the new person, you've got new ideas, and people look at you and go, well, we can't do that because this is the way we've always done it. And so that's where twatty comes from. So I'm excited to hear that ISS maybe breaks down the twatty in schools and gets people to think about different perspectives and new ideas. So good on you all for doing that. Dana, I want to dive a little bit deeper into the professional development. So with Jeff and I, we talk on our podcast about personalized learning. And that's what I'm hearing what you're doing, that the teachers have control over time and to some extent content to choose when they want to learn, how they potentially want to learn. So could you dive a little bit deeper on the ISS passport? Because one of my biggest concerns when the old model, we'll step on some toes here, when consultants would come in and do the one size fits all sharing and not differentiated, not applying a lot of what we do in our normal classrooms. And then for me as an instructional technologist, I would go, how do we bridge what that very smart content person brought to us into the classroom and into the experiences of the students? So if you could respond to that with what ISS does down on the kind of the micro level of how do you make this learning tangible for the students?
So our ISS passport really stems out of my dissertation. So I only finished my dissertation a few years ago on international schools, and I looked at really the professional development needs of our educators and our school leaders. And to geek out for a moment, so I really looked at the work of Andrew Hargraves and Michael Fullen on professional capital and how do we develop that within our international schools. And really, there's three different components, right? There's the human capital that really stems from the educator and the human capital that they're bringing into an organization. And then the social capital is really the component that's led by the school leader and how are they creating capital within their organization. And then there's decisional capital, which is kind of the balance in between the two of the human and the social, which is really looks at the teachers and the leaders, right? And so what we were trying to do is figure out how do we create autonomy, voice, and choice for educators for professional development? Because we know that school leaders want to say, okay, here's what you should be doing. But we also know that as a person who needs to learn, I need to have some voice and choice on what I need to learn. And for example, if I'm terrible at classroom management, I am not going to my principal and saying, I am terrible at managing kids in my classroom. And so we wanted to try to help them create so that they have some ability to say what they want to do, but then the school leaders also have some choice on that. So the passport, what we did is we have a lot of access to some phenomenal professional development consultants. And so what we've done is kind of screen them, right? Who's doing the work that we know is solid and really pertains to the international school environment? Because we've all been to PD where someone steps in, they've never been in an international school environment, and then immediately they start saying some things and everyone in the audience tunes out because they're like, they don't even get our schools, right? So we looked at who are some of those people that we think are really having the conversations that we need to have, and then put them all underneath the umbrella of this passport. And then within the passport, what we do is we are going out to schools and saying, okay, if you want, you can purchase this for everyone in your faculty and everyone in your staff. Everyone in your building with your domain name has full access. And so we're telling you, we know that this is a high-level professional development that pertains to our schools and talking about the topics that are relevant now. But now your teachers get to choose their own adventure. So they can choose as many or as little workshops as they would like to. We have over 55 individual unique webinars within the passport, not to mention all the curated resources. There's also a podcast in there and all those different components that we're trying to provide for educators. And then they can go in and they can choose things that work right for them. We also have things on, how do you create a budget? How do you do security within a school when you might be in different locations, and what are security risks at your school? So it's for everyone, not just the educators within our schools. And we've been doing things on standards-based grading and reporting and assessment. And what does that look like? And looking at different report cards and how do different people set those up and things of that nature. So a little bit of everything. We're trying to pull all of those pieces together so that everyone has access and there's equity for professional learning.
So question on that, and this is something we were talking to Jeff about. Are you providing guidance for the schools to say they're going to give them time potentially? Instead of having a normal PD day where everyone comes into the gym, you might say, okay, this morning we want everyone to go into the passport and choose the modules, the podcast, whatever they want. And then potentially other people who listen to similar ones can come together and reflect upon it and unpack what they learned. Do you all offer that kind of structure, the follow-up structure?
We do. We have a handful of schools that are doing that now with their faculty and staff. So they are saying, if our regular PD day is, the third Wednesday of every month, and halfway through the day, at noon, we stop classes and we're going to do professional learning, then they are doing that. They're saying, okay, so here are the handful of modules we'd like you to choose from this week. Go and choose which one you want. And then the second half of the day, we are going to go into small groups and we're going to talk about how are we going to utilize that professional learning within our context. And I think that's a huge component. And what we're trying to do as well is create templates that you can just immediately download. And then my tagline used to be use, abuse, or lose. Use it if you want to, abuse it if you, and twist it and tweak it so it works for your context, or lose it if it doesn't work for you. No skin off my back. And so I think that that's a really helpful thing because we know that there are great resources out there. It's just providing access to everyone. And one of the biggest components that I also found is at a previous school that I was at, I had $1 million in my professional development budget to provide professional development and professional learning for my expat community. And then as COVID hit, and one of the schools we were working with was this awesome little school in Madagascar with 13 teachers. Okay, I think their budget is $5,000. That does not mean that those students do not deserve the same quality of education as the kids whose teachers had $1 million access. And so we were trying to figure out how do we connect with these amazing consultants that I know myself and many people at ISS have been fortunate enough to work with. How do we put them in front of all of our international educators and staff and faculty? It's not just the haves and have-nots, that all schools and all educators and all staff have the same equal access to high quality professional development for a price that's affordable. And so that's also another component that we did with the passport. is it's completely based on tuition and enrollment. So if you have high tuition and high enrollment, guess what? It's going to cost more because you can afford it. And if you have low enrollment or you have low tuition, we have it all on a grid. And the cheapest passport for us is $2,000 for full access for an entire school for an entire year of professional development.
That's awesome.
So we're trying to make sure that we can reach everyone and that there's equity there, because those students shouldn't be losing out because their teachers don't have the same access to resources as another school.
That's really great to hear. And, that's something Dave and I have been talking about a lot, is how to personalize and individualize and, consider diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. And so that's just great to hear that you are also thinking along those lines as far as professional development, or what David likes to call professional learning or personal learning. That's awesome. So I'm going to take us in a slightly different direction, because for probably the last 7 or 8 years, I hadn't been recruiting for a while, and then I went to re-sign with ISS, and I went to the website, and there's a button there that says start a school. And it just was so tempting, because the number of times I've had conversations with colleagues about, oh, if only we could start our own school, that would be so cool. We could run it the way we want and have all the ideas we think are important. So what happens if I click that button? I don't know who wants to answer that, but I just think that's just such a cool, mysterious. I have clicked the button, let's be honest. I couldn't, hold back. But your ISS has become involved with the process of starting a school. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about that, one of you, either.
Yeah, I can start first, Nadine, if you want.
Sure, that's fine.
Okay. So yeah, that is how many of us have sat around, especially at a conference when we're with, the group of like-minded people, and we're like, let's just start our own school. Let's do this.
Exactly.
And
let's buy one of those villages in Spain that's, where they're selling it for $1,000 for the whole village or whatever it is. And let's have them do experiential where they learn to bake at the bakery and they learn to, garden and the whole, yeah. So please tell us about starting a school.
if you click on start, it's interesting to see the wide array of folks who click on that button too. So I work on the periphery of that component of our schools and helping schools with their curriculum. But, we'll have someone who just wants the Audrey school, and, they want their name on a school and they want to put it somewhere. And what's interesting is sometimes they have some background in education, and oftentimes they have almost no background in education.
No way.
And they think they're going to run it like a business. And, they don't understand that a school works very differently than the world of business. And so we come in and we help them figure out all those nuances and things of that nature. We'll also have, for instance, in Vietnam recently, there was a division of Nike, and they were in a small remote area of Vietnam, but they had so many different people coming from outside and then also within the community who they really wanted to make sure that all of the employees had access to a really strong education program. And there wasn't a really strong educational program within that small community. And so the head of the organization said, I'm going to provide this. Like, I want to help have a school be an offshoot of our company so that my local employees and my expat employees can all have a school within the community so that we're empowering everybody. And so normally someone from our school management and operations side of things reaches out and starts to advise. And we have a ton of different brochures and pieces and components and how-tos that we provide to people. In my dream world in the future, and it's something that's recently been on the table and discussed quite a bit at ISS, is how could we create almost that co-op type situation for our teachers and educators who have had that dream of starting their own school. One thing that we're doing right now is we are also working with Lumo Education, and we have something called the SISU schools. And the SISU schools are almost like a franchise school that you can buy, and it's a combination of the Finnish American model. So it's a Finnish education in the elementary, which is very play-based, hands-on, experiential. And then middle school is kind of a combination of those two, a marriage of the two. And then high school has a little bit more of an American international twist to it, because we have heard a lot from parents that they really still want their child to go into a university, and how might we best prepare them to go into a university with that kind of international and a little bit of an American Western tail end to the end of it. And it's super affordable way to kind of create. And I think we're on our 16th or 17th Sisu school that we've recently sold. And I was just in Portugal, actually, working on some of the secondary components of the curriculum with our team from Finland, which has been really fabulous to work with them and learn so much about the Finnish system, which, I grew up in America, so I know the American system, and then I spent my career internationally, but like to learn about the merging of those has been really fun.
I love that you are looking at, again, that ties in this whole idea of proactively seeking the diversity. And as Nadine was talking about, that idea that you didn't know about may be a really awesome way forward for you. So that's fantastic. So if you don't mind, I want to dig a little into something that you just had me thinking about is if, someone with a business mindset, David and I have talked about the proliferation of for-profit schools. When we started out, it was like, oh boy, for-profit school, look out, because they're going to be putting their money in their pockets. And so you're going to have a lack of resources, a lack of PD. Who's going to be looking out for the teachers and the kids? So my question is, maybe you can help us understand the model where someone might look at an international school and say, wow, look at the tuition these kids pay. That's a lot of money. We can make money off this. But my understanding from the not-for-profit schools is that the bulk, like, I don't know, 80%, you can help me with the numbers here, ladies, but of the money goes to hiring, retaining good teachers, getting them there, housing them, the benefit package, all of that. So that sounds contradictory. Can you please help me understand how a for-profit school works?
So, interestingly, my first overseas international job was with a for-profit school. And I will tell you, different schools, different agencies, different models. At the end of the day, that board and that head of school needs to see that it's student first and student focused, whether you're for profit or whether you're non for profit. And I think this is where ISS steps in. So, like Dana was talking about, sometimes people come in with the business model and they don't understand maybe best research-based practices to promote certain type of learning, or for students to see themselves in curriculum, and where do you interweave inclusion, diversity, create a sense of belonging. And so those are gaps that they have. And ISS has those resources with our Director of Diversity and Inclusion and Equity, with our PD, with our optimized program. And then, you can have that other reverse piece too, where here is someone with strong curriculum and instruction background, and there are key pieces to running a school that don't have to do with instruction, but impact it and children's learning immensely. Procurement of supplies, visas, that operation and management piece, making sure finance and budget, what's the school design going to look like? What's the master planning of the facilities to support the type of curriculum and learning that the school wants? So it's really a big picture. And often no one comes in with all of those characteristics. And so when someone's looking to start a school, ISS kind of provides that whole big, what do you need? What are your gaps? Here's what we can do. Here's where we can support you. Because in all honesty, whether your school is non-for-profit or for-profit, how you obtain that money might be different. It might be endowments, it might be investors, but at the end of the day, children still need to be the center of why we're doing what we're doing. And the things we're doing, whether they're technology, whether they are design and building, expansion and capex, and that needs to support the learning and the population that we are serving. So I don't know if that completely answers everything, but I wanted to just redirect that it was still student focused and should be in the best practices.
Amen.
All right, let's shift gears a little bit towards recruiting for mainly teacher candidates. Nadine, you're helping the leadership folks, and a lot of that's done outside of the fairs, I understand. And I realize that for both of you, managing the fairs and working with individual clients, that isn't your area. But pretend like we have some folks thinking about going overseas and they're trying to decide, well, how do I get into this game? I'm going to contact ISS. So how does that recruiting process flow? What does it look like? And how does ISS help its clients go through that process? Dana, why don't you start us off on that one?
Sure. So personally, what I think one of the best things to do is A, do your homework, and B, show up to a fair in person. What I love about fairs, so like I mentioned, I just came home from one in the past 24 hours, is you get to actually meet the people. And I think education is a people business. I had a long conversation with this woman who's brand new to international schools, and she said, I would never go to that country. And I said, well, why? What do you know about that country? She's like, nothing. I'm like, well, then why would you choose to not go to it? You have no idea if it's going to be amazing or not. And I said, the more you look into the country and the school, and you want to connect with the people and the leadership within a school. And, one of the benefits of an in-person fair is you get to hear from other people about other places and locations they've been. What's kind of, the story of that school. I love going to school presentations and hearing heads of school talk about what's important to them, because then that tells me a lot about the mission and vision of the school, their direction, and whether I'm a right fit. And to me, one of the main reasons I'm working at ISS is I think Liz Duffy is an amazing human being. And as soon as I started working with her, long years before I started working at ISS, but I started working with her in the Diversity Collaborative, I was like, okay, this is something I believe in. This is something I feel passionate about and strongly about. So trying to find those people that you connect with is a huge thing. I think at ISS, we also try to run webinars and sessions on what does it even mean to be an international educator. So we've run numerous webinars and Zoom sessions with folks and with different universities and doing outreach, trying to help people understand what are the nuances. Yes, someone's going to ask you if you're married, if you have dependents. Those are questions that you would never be asked in America, but they are important because they need to get visas for your children. At one point, I was offered a beautiful job and they had forgotten to ask me. And I think it was pretty clear that I had 3 dependents and I'm single. And they said, well, we can only bring 1. I'm like, so am I supposed to sell the other 2 children? Like, I don't know
where did they go?
Like, that's an important component. We should have had this conversation before I made it as a finalist, because that's a no-brainer. So there are nuances to working in international schools that are unique, and I think an in-person fair can really help answer some of those questions. Nadine, you want to tag on to that?
Sure. And I think my job does entail, actually, David, that outreach. So beyond fairs, this is why I go to educational conferences and workshops, because even to build a leadership capacity, you have to build a teaching capacity in international schools, right? And I think we've often looked in the same places and get the same results or lack of results. And so one of the things we're doing at ISS is diversifying our outreach. Who have we not reached? Why? And how do we reach them? And essentially, if I find a good teacher in a building, in a supermarket, at a conference, doing a presentation, I go and I'm talking to them. I love your passion. I love this area of your strength. Let me tell you what you can do with this in an international school.
Nice.
And I tell the stories, I share my own experiences, and I listen. I listen to learn what that person is interested in. and then help gear them. So often what happens is those conversations then turn into, here, let's exchange some contact information. Let's have a conversation, share, they share their CVs, they share their cover letter. We talk family first, right? Because moving overseas has to be a family decision. And I get to know what's their background personally, where they're from, what states they've been, what their interests are. If they have kids, how many? Are they empty nesters now? How does that feel? I mean, so it's time consuming, but so worth it, right? If they have parents and they're elderly, where are they in the world? How does flights look, etc. And we meet, and then we go over, especially if someone is coming from an area that, for example, let's use the US, or they're coming from India and they're trying to get into a school in China or in Europe. And so they sometimes, when they're used to a different curriculum or a different format, the resumes tend to be geared for what they're used to. And one of the things I love doing is sitting and doing that coaching. And I call it leadership coaching because it's not your title that makes you a leader. It's how you think and process and what you do with those skill sets and dispositions you have. And so I take those opportunities to do leadership coaching because that impacts how you perform in the classroom. And so we'll go over that. We'll also look at, okay, with your CV and your cover letter, I see the titles and I see the task that you do, but how did that impact students? That needs to be reflected on your CV and in your cover letter. And so we talk about ways to do that. Results also don't have to be quantifiable. They can be qualitative as well. And what does that look like? To highlight the successes and your passion and how you bring students forward. And so we do a lot of that. So there's that leadership coaching. And then again, part of that interview process is really digging deep and finding out where would you best feel supported, best be an asset, best feel comfortable. Because I don't like to use the word fit because sometimes I think that would be a whole nother conversation. There's some connotation about what's the right fit, and those perspectives are not always the best perspectives or the only perspectives. But I do think people need to be in a space that they feel comfortable. And then sometimes in some countries, there are certain laws. And I think it's important to share with candidates, like, okay, this country has this law, and this is how that school curtails that and supports their community that fits in a certain demographic. And so I think that work, again, ISS, very human-based. We have tools like EduRecruit and Optimize that help us manage the work. But at the end of the day, it's a human service, and we have to just connect with people. And so we have a fair, the Atlanta Fair just finished. Unfortunately, while I was in Atlanta, I couldn't go. I had COVID.
Oh, no.
It was, yeah. I went to POCC. I connected with thousands of people, and apparently at some point between there and the airport, caught COVID. But that was also a wonderful opportunity to meet with people who are used to community-based type schools and say, hey, have you ever taken a look at international schools? This is what we do, and I must have had at least 100 conversations even since coming back with people who are great educators and leaders and from a diverse array of background and countries, because there were more than 10 different countries even represented at that conference, plus everyone from the US. And so I think it's just looking at who can we partner with. I was sharing with David before we started that my background in recruitment started with Strategenius, and they are a minority-owned and based recruitment firm that places people and helps build equity and diversity. And I learned a lot being in that space. And so when someone says they're looking to come back stateside and looking for independent schools, that's a resource that I can give and support the community international and even guide them as what that same thing I would do for those coming from the US to go overseas. Here's what it looks like when you're thinking of coming back. Here's some of the terminologies that it sounds a little different. A different word is used in the US or a particular region of the US that they might be interested in. And then vice versa, when there are candidates that say, we think we want to try overseas, Orpheus and Joyce and Mary Rose, they're giving me a call. Nadine, we're introducing you to such and such because they're, those partnerships are important. Likewise, tapping into other resources and people out there that can expand our outreach to new markets and different people that, as Dana talked about, don't know about international schools, don't understand that you get to design your teaching. There gets to be an autonomy in how you present material often and how you allow students to see themselves in the curriculum. And I will share, for candidates often like people of color who are underrepresented, you get to work in communities where the student body is the majority students of color and the whole global. And so I think that's powerful because often people want to have that reach to be able to impact and have a better experience than maybe they had in school. And I would even, talk about myself, for example, at that. And the international world gives us that. You meet third culture students, right? Their parents' passport is the US and the UK. They were born in Egypt. They went to school in Vietnam. They're now in China. They're heading to Colombia next. It's that kind of world. And what a great experience to have people who look like you and have similar experiences to you and who are open to allowing you to see yourself in the curriculum in a positive way. Yeah, those are the people we want. Those are the people that are most successful in international schools because they have that intercultural competency. They embrace language as a strength. The bicultural, multicultural aspect, being third culture, whatever that means, because you're just so interconnected, allows them to thrive because the students can connect with them. And that doesn't matter what your skin color and your background is. That's about the competency and the way you're thinking. And so that's what we're looking for. Those are the teachers we want. Those are the leaders that we want. And, we work particularly with boards to help see that. And so I might be going off a little bit, but sometimes the language just says international school teaching experience for 5 years or have been a head of school for 5 years in that region. And then sometimes I have to say, okay, statistically, you've just narrowed out a broad scope of people. When you say you want prior head experience, for example, what are those competencies and skills that you would like? Is it the budgeting? Is it the finance? Is it instructional design? Is it relational? Let's talk about the skill sets that you want. And we can put that in a job description, for example. One of the things you learn when you go overseas and teach in international schools, I think one of my biggest learnings is how important language is and not just spoken language. And that words have different meaning and understanding in translation. And so part of language is culture and understanding and embracing that so that a word may translate to mean nervous, but the culture knows that as being angry. Those two things are different things. And how do you meet the needs if you don't understand that or you're open to understanding how language impacts, even body language? In some cultures, pointing may be offensive, and others it may be inviting. Those things are important, and people that are willing to be culturally responsive and be warm demanders and hold themselves and others accountable for children's safety and their community safety, those are the people that do well. Those are the people we seek out no matter where they are. So if we're in Thailand for an event, Dana and I, we're the whole ISS team, we're recruiting. We go into, you see, she talked about crew. She's on crew in the water and she's recruiting. That's what we do. It's just what we do.
Well, that is such a rich, and it's so clear that for you, this is a calling and not a job, and your passion just shines through. And I really love that you talk about, and both of you talk about your feelings around this, and it's incredible. And I loved when you talked about the person who's, you know, this passport, these parents, this country, moving to there, that question of that so hard to answer question of where are you from, right? And, what is your identity? And I'm multicultural. That's my identity. So I love that. I wanted to ask, you talk a lot about diversity, inclusion, and sort of that personalizing. We had a question around the fairs. Do they have personalities? Do they cater to different populations or needs, geographic job placement? Do the different fairs at different times of year and in different locations have flavors? Maybe Dana, you can start on that one.
Sure. So we just ran our fair in Atlanta, and we do that in conjunction with AMISA, which is really quite an amazing opportunity because the AMISA region is, the schools in South America. And what's nice is, each region has its own unique characteristics. And the AMISA schools as a whole may not have the same salaries or tuition that you have in Asia. And in Asia, there's some high ticket prices. But then also in Asia, I know because I was in Hong Kong, I didn't save a dime the entire time I was in Hong Kong in any way, shape, or form. And I lived in an 800 square foot apartment with 3 teenagers. That was tight, right? So, but in a MESA region, you may not, at the end of the day, my salary may not look the same, but the potential for savings is totally different.
Exactly.
The sense of community and family within that region is a different feel. And so all of our conferences and all of the different regional organizations have their own unique components and pieces. And so working with AMISA, what's nice is we're kind of like trying to get ahead of the game for people who, AMISA in March is going to have a harder time hiring than maybe December, because December is when, people are still like, okay, I'm looking for a job. But in March, so they're trying to get ahead of the game on MISA and run stuff right away in the beginning and say, okay, here's what we've got. And then we piggyback on them, and their candidates who haven't found a position through the MISA recruiting fair then come over into ISS. We have an understanding with both that if someone registers for ours, they can go to theirs. If someone registers for theirs, they can come to ours. And then they come, and we still continue to have, but like at our fair, we also had schools from all over, from Asia, from the Middle East, from Africa, all different places. And so it's just a different kind of feel. And it's also kind of nice. I mean, personally, if I was recruiting, you can come home and you also get a trip home for the holidays, because school, let's face it, gets out in the next few days for most of our international schools. So if you can say, oh, I'm coming to go to the recruiting fair, and then I'm just going to stay home and finish out, so then you get a trip with your family. And for the conference that we're hosting in DC, we always do that one in conjunction with AAIE, because we have all the school leaders already, they come together for the AAIE conference, and then they're already there. So if they're there, guess what? Then you're there, let's recruit. Let's find a bunch of educators for you, a way for you to, do some recruiting right then and there and pull people together. And you've just come out of, a few days of phenomenal professional development. Your brain's, moving and churning a million different directions. Let's help you find that right person. So I think the fairs have different feels and different personalities. Nadine?
I would agree, Dana, and different pulls, right? And different times of year also do that. So in February, the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic area gets a little antsy about jobs. Those discussions have happened in those regions. And so it's also usually that time period where, whether they call it President's Week or it's the week we cancel school because we need to conserve energy when you're doing stateside leadership, people are available. And so there is that feel to draw people in who by this time we've placed a lot of the people already in the international world, because we're at an earlier stage where by October we've put in that we're looking for another job, and we go looking for that job, and if we're already in the international world. But those that might be new to that world, these fairs in that particular location in DC really attract people who are now thinking, yeah, what is international schools like? And there's PD, and there's things I can go to, and I can go to this fair, and I can actually meet different people and learn. Washington International School is right there. Oh, there are international schools within the US. Wow. And and their population has so many different people. So it's really a different feel, I think, because location adds to that, timing adds to that. We're also looking at where is our capacity again to diversify our outreach. I had a great conversation with Warren Reed of Nemnet, who has a minority recruitment database across the globe and within the US. And so we just want to expand our services at ISS. So if that means partnering to use other database, if it means putting ourselves before different audiences, that's what we're going to do. Because at the end of the day, we are really just trying to get the best people, the best talent. And we know from research, the more diverse, and when I talk about diversity, I'm not talking just gender and race, but with the more diverse and perspectives and peoples that we can bring in, the richer there is opportunity for innovation and growth. And that's in any industry. And why would we not want that for education, which I'm biased is probably the most important industry because it shapes the future of the world, right? It shapes every other industry. And so we're being really intentional in that timing and location for when we are doing that fair, who's coming, who we can invite, how we can expand exposure to areas that we might not have known before. I think that's one of the learnings and gains of COVID. We had to learn to pivot. I think many of us increased our adaptability quotient. And so when you have increased adaptability quotient and emotional intelligence coupled with that cognitive, like sky's the limit. Like, how do we use those things to think differently and do differently?
Well, thanks for that rundown on recruiting. And now let's take a jump looking into the future a little bit. One, kind of the rest of the school year. So what is the current big picture outlook for international schools kind of getting through the rest of this year, responding to COVID, adapting lessons learned, and also looking at what are challenges and opportunities going out the next 3 to 5 years? So kind of short term, where are we headed for the end of this year, and then maybe 3, 5 years out. Nadine, are you okay to start us for this one?
Sure. I think one of the things moving forward is wellness for our community, for our teachers, for our administrators, for our students, making sure that we are supporting that whole person. And that is going to provide sustainability in the long run, continuing to learn, continue to grow, but to make sure that we're taking care of the people who are taking care of the people.
Well, you just hit on one of David's main themes. Well, both of ours, really, because I've been a health and wellness teacher for many years. So we love that you pulled that up. Dana, anything you'd like to add for the future, what you see?
As I mentioned before, I think we're still learning. So we're trying to figure out how do we meet the needs of everyone as we try to negotiate what's in person, what's better online. How do we navigate those waters? Because I think we all still have a lot to learn on what do we prefer. How many times should we want to be in a Brady Bunch screen versus face to face and giving someone a hug,
That's a really lovely way to put it. Thank you, ladies, both so much. This has been an enriching and delightful experience that, went well beyond my expectations of, I really didn't know that much about what ISS did, and you have represented them so well. And as I said before, you've humanized this, massive corporation as I saw it for me. And so thank you so much for bringing your passion, your wonderfully broad perspectives, and your truly in-depth knowledge of and love for the field of international education. It's beautiful. And I'm going to hope to run into you in a grocery store, Nadine, and have a conversation about this incredible lifestyle. And maybe talk with Dana a little more about the why wouldn't you go to X country? Because you don't know until you try it. And I love both of your perspectives. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you for the opportunity. Oh, trust me, getting Dana in a room too. We, when she and I are together in a conference, it's something else. So we'll talk about fruits, international school, and we'll
Love
shop.
that.
I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it. And with a big hug in there to boot. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting us and allowing us to
Thank
be a part
you.
of this.
Thank you for joining us today on Educators Going Global.
You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and all the other usual suspects.
Please subscribe, like us, and leave a review on Apple and Spotify, and let your teaching friends know about us so we can grow our community.
Please reach out at educatorsgoingglobal@gmail.com and join our Facebook group, Educators Going Global, if you have ideas, comments, or wish to share a Going Global story of your own.
You can also find us on Instagram at Educators Going Global.
Please visit our website as well, www.educatorsgoingglobal.com. All our podcast episodes are on there by topic, along with blog posts, Going Global stories, and our ever-growing resource library. For now, this is Audrey
And David.
inviting you to travel,
Teach.
and connect with us.